I'm William Boylan. I was pastor of this Byfield Parish Church for half a century, and I learned an awful lot about our nation's history as it relates to the government, and of course it was very instructive how the grace of God was operating in the lives of many of the people that put us together as a nation. This man here was standing beside the gravestone of a Supreme Court justice. Very timely, it seems to me, that as I speak to you, we are thinking about the appointment of a new Supreme Court justice. Well, this man, William Henry Moody, was a Supreme Court justice, and not only that, he was the Attorney General of the United States, and he was the Secretary of the Navy. He was a member of the House of Representatives. He was a congressman. So here's a very unique man. He served in all three branches of the government. So as I've thought about his life, he is a descendant of the founder of the Byfield Parish Church. His great-great-great-grandmother was Mehetabel Moody. What interests me, beyond the man and his contributions, is the role that the church itself has played in the formation and the development of this country. The Byfield Parish Church is the first independent congregational church in America. Arguably, Congregationalist formed America. It was Congregationalism that broke with the medieval idea of being a church and turned it upside down. Instead of having leaders at the top, the leaders were at the bottom. They were the congregation. The congregation came to meet and to think and to make decisions in the life of the church. And when they formed towns, they did the same thing, except it was town meetings. They came together and they decided their affairs. In the church, the congregational churches, the pastor was voted into his position. And so in the towns, the selectmen and others were voted into their positions. And that voting practice continues right down to our own day. We'll be voting, as you hear this tape, I'm talking just before the presidential elections, which come up about a week from now in the future. Well, that all came out of the life of the churches. And men like this, like William Moody. If you think about this particular church, and let me just run through this, it's so interesting, at least to me, I think it might be to you. The church was founded in order to establish a community where God would be manifest in the lives of the people. They were Puritans, and he was. Then they took careful consideration, or they made careful consideration of how they would function in terms of authority. The Bible says be in a subjection to all authority, so they certainly understood authority was necessary. There needed to be government, but the way they formed their government was unique in the history of the world, ultimately. And so we are, in many ways, a very unusual, historically speaking, country on the face of the earth. At least we were when we first came into being. And in this congregational church, the first anti-slavery tract in America was written. There was a tract written about the need to elevate the place of women in the life of the church. Just before the American Revolution, the second pastor of this church preached to the general court, and he said to them to be careful. Now, at that time, they were a colony of England, and he was really warning the King of England if he didn't let up on his colony, he'd lose it. He said, the king's heart is a stream of water in the hands of the Lord. He turns it wherever he will. And apparently his will was to make an independent country out of what was then a colony. Out of this parish came a man whose death, who was really assassinated for publishing anti-slavery tracts just before the Civil War. And John Quincy Adams, who had already been sixth president of the United States, said of Elijah Parrish Lovejoy's death that it was an American earthquake, and that the consequences would be ultimately the emancipation of the slaves. Then you come into the early 20th century, and here's where we meet up with William Moody. And he, as I say, is involved in all three branches of government as the Secretary of the Navy, the Attorney General of the United States, and an associate member of the Supreme Court. And just to top it off, and this is my own experience, we had a national convocation at Byfield in 1984, and we were challenging the country to think about its Christian roots again, biblical roots, not just what can be called Christianity, but the real biblical roots of the country. And that was 1984, and before that year ended, I myself, on behalf of the church, was invited to be at briefings at the White House. Then I was added to a State Department briefing list. Then 2 presidents later, invited to be with the President of the United States when he signed faith-based initiatives. I don't think any of that's an accident, that this little obscure parish out here, 35 miles north of Boston, out in Stillwater's backwoods country, had such a profound influence on the way in which this country thought about itself and developed.